On screen, Hollywood love looks effortless, steamy kisses, heart-fluttering glances, the works. But behind the scenes, sometimes it's less happily ever after, and more, don't stand too close or someone's getting slapped. Why do some of cinema's most swoon-worthy couples barely tolerate each other when the director yells cut? Ever wondered how real-life feuds can fuel that magnetic, tortured chemistry? Stick around, because some of these love stories are messier than a soap opera on Fast Forward. Humphrey Bogart and Audrey Hepburn. Picture this. The legendary bogey, grizzled and sharp-tongued, meets Hollywood's darling ingenue, Audrey Hepburn, on the sun-dappled set of Sabrina. You'd think their romance would sizzle both on and off camera. In reality, not even close. Humphrey Bogart walked into the production already annoyed. He'd wanted his wife, Lauren Bacall, cast as Sabrina, not the doe-eyed, softly spoken Audrey. So he greeted his new co-star with a cold front that could freeze a gin martini. Bogart didn't just keep his distance. He openly criticized Hepburn's acting, complaining to anyone within earshot that she was inexperienced and needed too many takes. He was an old-school professional, no patience for what he saw as frivolous method acting or rehearsed innocence. Bogart griped that Audrey had to be coached right through every scene, and he was never shy about voicing his opinion. Hepburn, meanwhile, did her best to keep things civil, but even her legendary grace couldn't melt Bogey's frosty demeanor. Add to that, a messy love triangle off camera. During the shoot, Audrey fell into a whirlwind affair with her other co-star, William Holden, which left Bogart even crankier. He'd wanted Holden gone, and Bacall by his side. It's no wonder the Sabrina set was less champagne and caviar, more barbs and bruised egos. Ironically, the real-life tension translated into electric scenes that left audiences swooning, proving once again that hate and love can sometimes look identical under a Hollywood spotlight. In the end, Hepburn walked away with an Oscar nomination, and Bogart, as always, kept his reputation as the man who never let his guard down, even for movie magic. Harrison Ford and Shaun Young. In Blade Runner, Rick Deckard and Rachel smolder with that classic noir tension, the kind that makes rain-soaked cityscapes feel electric. Off-camera, though, Harrison Ford and Shaun Young could barely stand to be in the same room, let alone in each other's arms. Their chemistry was less romantic heat, more hostile workplace. Shaun Young, fresh to the Hollywood game, was stepping into her first major role. Harrison Ford, already a bona fide movie star, was a seasoned pro, and reportedly not thrilled to play babysitter. Their relationship started off chilly and quickly slid into Arctic. Rumors flew around the set that Ford considered Young too green for such a big part. The director, Ridley Scott, didn't exactly make things easier. He reportedly fueled the actors' animosity, hoping the tension would bring a sharper edge to their scenes. But nothing topped what happened during that infamous love scene. Crew members called it the hate scene, and for good reason. Ford, frustrated with the endless takes and lack of chemistry, allegedly manhandled Young a little too roughly, pushing her during an argument and generally making her feel like an outsider. Young, in turn, found Ford's dismissive attitude and gruff professionalism impossible to break through. The set buzzed with stories. Young going home in tears, Ford venting about his co-star, and a love scene so awkward it took on a life of its own among the crew. What audiences saw was passion, but what really burned between these two was resentment. If the icy cold, rain-slicked romance felt more like a duel than a seduction, now you know why. In classic Hollywood style, the producers just shrugged. If the cameras captured sparks, who cared if they came from anger instead of affection? Sometimes the real drama isn't in the script. It's in the spaces between action and cut. Richard Beymer and Natalie Wood. You'd never guess from their iconic rooftop duet. But West Side Story's star-crossed lovers were more sharks and jets off-camera than Romeo and Juliet. Natalie Wood, Hollywood's tragic princess, was legendary for her beauty and poise, while Richard Beymer, cast as Tony, was an up-and-comer just trying to survive the cutthroat set. Together, they brought a doomed love to life on screen. But behind the scenes, Natalie just couldn't stand him. The gossip mill never stopped churning on this one. Rumor had it, Wood kept a hate list on her dressing room wall, and Richard Beymer's name sat right at the top. No one could really pin down why. Maybe it was chemistry that curdled, or Beymer's own awkwardness. But Natalie's distaste was so open, cast members couldn't help but notice. Russ Tamblyn, who played Riff, recalled asking Natalie point-blank why Beymer made the list. Her answer, "I just don't like him." Beymer, for his part, had no idea about the list until years later, when Tamblyn casually dropped the bomb while they worked on Twin Peaks. Imagine hearing, decades on, that your most famous co-star loathed you so much she kept a scoreboard. It's pure Hollywood surrealism. All that tension meant the film's most romantic scenes had to be achieved through sheer professional grit. If Tony and Maria seem a bit too dreamy, maybe it's because Natalie was busy imagining herself anywhere but next to Richard. Yet somehow, that undercurrent of distance worked. The longing and tragedy felt real, even if the love didn't. Sometimes, the prettiest illusions come with the sharpest edges. Clark Gable and Vivien Leigh. On screen, Rhett and Scarlett burn with one of Hollywood's most iconic, tempestuous romances. But off-camera, Clark Gable and Vivien Leigh were proof that sometimes legendary chemistry is just another word for mutual misery. Filming Gone with the Wind was as stormy behind the scenes as the Civil War raging in the background. Vivien Leigh, an English stage actress, won the coveted role of Scarlett O'Hara after a long, highly publicized search. Clark Gable, the undisputed king of Hollywood, was less than thrilled to be swept up in the epic. He reportedly called the production a pain in the ass and bristled at Leigh's meticulous approach to acting. Leigh was deeply method, often needing multiple takes to capture the right nuance, which drove Gable crazy. He was a one-take-and-done, old-school American star who found Leigh's emotional intensity draining and pretentious. The infamous burning of Atlanta wasn't the only thing smoldering. Leigh once confessed the most difficult part of filming wasn't the emotional breakdowns or endless hours. It was enduring Gable's bad breath, rumored to be the result of his dental issues. Gable, meanwhile, found Leigh's perfectionism and exhaustion with the grueling schedule unprofessional, and reportedly grumbled about her to anyone who would listen. Still, neither let their private grievances derail the show. Director Victor Fleming kept a tight ship, often acting as referee between his stars. Leigh, always the professional, never let her personal feelings show on camera. Gable did what he always did, delivered a performance so charismatic, audiences never guessed how little love was lost between the leads. The result? Sparks flew. Just not always the kind you'd hope for. If the on-screen passion in Gone with the Wind feels a bit too real, that's because sometimes all it takes is a little real-life exasperation to set the screen on fire. Marilyn Monroe and Laurence Olivier Hollywood royalty doesn't always play nice, and the set of The Prince and The Showgirl was proof. Marilyn Monroe, then at the height of her fame and chaos, met her match in Laurence Olivier, Shakespearean legend, director, and control freak. The result? A legendary romantic comedy where every laugh masked genuine contempt. Olivier thought Monroe's method, acting and reliance on her coach were a waste of time. To him, acting was about discipline and technique, not emotion and therapy sessions. Monroe, on the other hand, was already on shaky ground, battling anxiety, insomnia, and a reputation for being difficult. Olivier's perfectionism, combined with his dismissive attitude, pushed her to the brink. He openly criticized her in front of the crew, rolling his eyes at her missed cues and late arrivals. When Monroe got stuck in a scene, Olivier would bark, "Just be sexy," as if that was all it took. Monroe, feeling targeted and humiliated, retreated further into insecurity. The tension became so thick that crew members joked about needing a referee. Every interaction was a potential explosion. Monroe would storm off set. Olivier would fume and complain to anyone who'd listen. Their dynamic seeped into the film, making every on-screen exchange a subtle duel. Ironically, all that friction produced a strange alchemy. Their performances popped with awkward charm and manic tension, giving the film its memorable edge. But once the final scene was shot, both stars couldn't wait to put the Atlantic Ocean between them. Olivier later called the shoot a nightmare. Monroe. She swore she'd never work with him again. In the end, their clash became Hollywood legend, a case study in what happens when unstoppable force meets immovable object, and both forget it's just a job. Joan Crawford and Francho Tone. In the glamorous, cutthroat world of 1930s MGM, romance wasn't always what it seemed. Take The Gorgeous Hussy. The title could have described Joan Crawford herself, one of Hollywood's most ambitious stars. Cast opposite Francho Tone, the studio hoped for on-screen sparks. They got fireworks, but not the kind that make directors happy. Off-camera, Crawford and Tone's dynamic was as dramatic as anything written for the screen. The gossip columns loved to whisper that Joan was head over heels for Francho, pursuing him with a relentless focus that even the most hard-boiled reporter couldn't ignore. But here's the twist. Francho was far more interested in classy, intellectual gatherings and Shakespeare than Hollywood social climbing. Crawford was determined to win him over, even inviting him to raucous parties and studio events just to keep him close. The courtship eventually led to marriage, proving that sometimes Hollywood's off-screen pairings are just as dramatic as the movies themselves. But that didn't mean things were smooth sailing on set. Francho Tone was a classically trained actor, which sometimes clashed with Crawford's more pragmatic, no-nonsense approach to stardom. Tone thought Joan was too brash, too focused on her image. Crawford thought Tone was highbrow and aloof. Their professional rivalry bubbled beneath every line. Studio insiders whispered that the tension was so thick, you could slice it with a prop sword. Crawford, never one to play second fiddle, resented any suggestion that Tone was the real actor of the pair. Meanwhile, Tone tired quickly of Joan's constant need for control. When the marriage ended, so did any chance at off-screen harmony. But on film, their conflicted chemistry gave The Gorgeous Hussy an edge that few 1930s romances could match. Sometimes, a little real-life friction is just what the script doctor ordered. Katherine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. They were the golden couple of classic Hollywood on screen. Their banter crackled, and audiences fell in love with the idea of Hepburn and Tracy as the perfect match. But behind the witticisms and playful chemistry, their partnership was far from the storybook romance the studio system wanted you to believe. Katherine Hepburn was bold, fiercely independent, and openly intellectual, a New England blue blood with a sharp tongue and a strong sense of her own worth. Spencer Tracy was, by contrast, intensely private, conservative, and battling personal demons, including alcoholism and a troubled marriage he refused to end. Though their chemistry was legendary, across 9 films, from Woman of the Year to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, their off-screen relationship was a powder keg of conflict and compromise. Tracy could be moody, brooding, and withdrawn, prone to disappearing for days, or showing up on set in a foul mood. Hepburn, used to being in control, often clashed with his stubbornness and resentment of her outspoken ways. While Hepburn deeply cared for Tracy, she was also frustrated by his self-destructive habits and his refusal to fully commit. On several sets, crew members whispered about the tension. Hepburn would sometimes push Tracy for more emotional honesty in scenes, only to be met with stone silence or a cutting remark. Yet, what audiences saw on screen, the bickering, the longing, the unresolved tension, wasn't just acting. It was 2 people grappling with love's messiest realities, each fighting to maintain dignity in a world that demanded compromise. The studio system spun the pairing as glamorous, but in truth, It was a relationship marked by pain, patience, and the stubborn refusal to give up. So, next time you see them sparring in a romantic comedy, remember, their real-life struggles made their on-screen love stories both unforgettable and achingly authentic. William Powell and Jean Harlo. On paper, William Powell and Jean Harlo should have been Hollywood's dream couple, a debonair leading man and a platinum-haired bombshell, both at the height of their fame. MGM paired them for Reckless, expecting a sparkling romance. Instead, what they got was a lesson in what happens when oil meets water, both on and off the screen. Powell was the epitome of old-school charm, witty, urbane, with a knack for stealing every scene with just a raised eyebrow. Jean Harlo, meanwhile, was brash, impulsive, and always eager to break the rules, her stardom fueled by raw charisma and a rebellious spirit. Their approaches to acting couldn't have been more different. Powell meticulously prepared every line, while Harlo preferred improvising and letting her instincts take over. On set, these differences turned quickly into friction. Powell reportedly found Harlo's lack of discipline and playful attitude distracting, even childish. He resented her constant ad-libbing and sometimes refused to share the spotlight, which only made Harlo dig her heels in further. Off-camera, things didn't improve. Harlo's sense of humor grated on Powell's nerves, and Powell's criticism left Harlo feeling belittled and misunderstood. Despite the drama, the movie managed to capture flashes of real passion, likely because the tension was so genuine. Powell once joked that their chemistry was the result of mutual irritation. While they kept things professional enough to finish the film, both swore off future collaborations. MGM quietly shelved plans to reunite them, opting for actors who could at least stand each other's company. What remains is a fascinating portrait of two stars who brought out the worst in each other, but also a little cinematic magic. Reckless serves as a reminder. Sometimes, Hollywood's most memorable screen romances are built on a whole lot of real-world exasperation. Gene Kelly and Debbie Reynolds. The rain may have been fake, but the tension between Gene Kelly and Debbie Reynolds on the set of Singin' in the Rain was all too real. Today, their on-screen partnership is remembered as pure movie magic, the kind that turns musical numbers into cinematic legend. But for Reynolds, the magic was mixed with misery, and for Kelly, it was a test of patience that sometimes ran out. Gene Kelly, by the time of Singin' in the Rain, was already a Hollywood titan, perfectionist, creative visionary, and a man with a reputation for pushing his dance partners to the limit. Debbie Reynolds, by contrast, was a teen with almost no professional dance experience, hand-picked by the studio for her fresh-faced charm and infectious spirit. Kelly didn't want her cast. He made it clear she wasn't up to the challenge. From day one, he was a hard taskmaster, often impatient, sharp-tongued, and utterly unforgiving if Reynolds missed a step. Reynolds, desperate to prove herself, put in endless hours of practice, sometimes dancing until her feet bled. She later described Kelly as both an inspiration and a tyrant, a man who could switch from encouragement to icy criticism in a heartbeat. Crew members recalled moments when Kelly would storm off the set, fuming over what he saw as Reynolds' amateurism. Reynolds, for her part, would hide under the piano and cry, only to return to set determined to get it right. Yet, when the cameras rolled, every ounce of struggle and tension transformed into electricity. Their performances crackled with real energy, their legendary good morning routine hiding all traces of backstage bruises, physical and emotional alike. Kelly would later grudgingly admit that Reynolds had grit, and Reynolds credited Kelly with making her a star, even as she called Singin' in the Rain the hardest thing I ever did. Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, Hollywood's original dance duo, glided through 9 films, dazzling audiences with footwork that looked effortless. But if you think their partnership was all champagne and moonlight, think again. Behind those graceful routines and flirtatious glances was a working relationship defined by friction, fatigue, and the quiet battle for creative control. Stair was a notorious perfectionist. He would rehearse for hours, obsessing over every step, every camera angle, and every bit of choreography until it was flawless. Rogers, though a talented dancer in her own right, was never given the same respect in Hollywood's publicity machine. While Stair was lauded as a genius, Rogers was often treated as the girl who kept up, a label that infuriated her. Rogers wanted more say in her routines, more credit for her hard work, and a break from the relentless grind. The tension reached its peak on the set of Top Hat. Rogers' feet bled from endless takes, and Stair, laser-focused, seemed oblivious to her pain. Their workdays stretched on, filled with arguments about everything from costume choices, Rogers' famous feather dress shed everywhere, much to Stair's annoyance, to the pace of rehearsal. Crew members would later say the set was a minefield. One misstep, and tempers would flare. Still, when the director called action, the two locked into perfect sync, spinning all that exhaustion and exasperation into pure movie magic. Their chemistry wasn't born from affection, but from the sheer, stubborn determination to outshine each other, and, maybe, to prove a point to the world. In interviews, Rogers would often say, "I did everything Fred did, but backwards and in heels." The line is a joke, but also a battle cry. For all their behind-the-scenes battles, Stair and Rogers delivered romance, elegance, and a touch of real-life grit, leaving audiences none the wiser about the dance that really mattered, the one behind the curtain. Sometimes, the most dazzling partnerships are forged not in friendship, but in fire, and the audience, blissfully unaware, just gets to soak in the magic. Katherine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart. On screen, Katherine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart's journey down the river in The African Queen feels like a master class in odd couple romance, her prim British missionary thawing under his rough-hewn charm. But behind the scenes, the river wasn't the only thing that got choppy. Hollywood's most unlikely couple spent as much energy tolerating each other as they did surviving the wilds of the Congo. Bogart, the hard-drinking, chain-smoking American legend, had no patience for what he saw as Hepburn's highbrow manner and strict professionalism. Hepburn, on the other hand, was appalled by Bogart's on-set antics, late-night parties, and aversion to hygiene. He once bragged that the gin he drank kept him safe from waterborne diseases. She brought along bottled water and a medicine chest. Bogart brought sardonic jokes and an endless supply of cigarettes. Then, there was the matter of the climate. Filming on location in Africa was no picnic. Heat, humidity, and dysentery plagued the crew. Hepburn fell desperately ill, barely able to keep food down. Bogart, miraculously, avoided the worst of it. He claimed thanks to all that gin. The two clashed over everything: rehearsal schedules, acting styles, even lunch breaks. Bogart, ever the pragmatist, liked to wing it. Hepburn insisted on running lines and perfect blocking. Despite their differences, both respected each other's talent, and that grudging respect translated into a dynamic as unpredictable as the river itself. Director John Huston famously fueled their rivalry, knowing it would electrify their scenes. The result? The African Queen became a classic, buoyed by a romance that sizzled with genuine tension and real-world frustration. By the time the film wrapped, Bogart had a new respect for Hepburn's tenacity and a shiny Oscar to boot. Hepburn, ever gracious, called Bogart a real pro if you could stand him long enough. Sometimes the best screen chemistry is just two pros refusing to back down. Greer Garson and Walter Pigeon. Greer Garson and Walter Pigeon looked like the embodiment of marital bliss on screen, starring as loving couples in not one, but 8 classic MGM hits, including the beloved Mrs. Miniver. Their dynamic, tender chemistry was so convincing, audiences swore they must be close friends, or even secret lovers. But behind the scenes, Their partnership was a case study in professional courtesy, emphasis on professional. Garson was cerebral, intensely committed, and approached her craft with almost academic precision. She came to set prepared for every scene, sometimes quoting Shakespeare or dissecting character motivation between takes. Walter Pigeon, though respected for his gravitas, was more relaxed, a man who liked his workdays smooth, efficient, and free from drama. Garson's relentless perfectionism grated on Pigeon's nerves, especially during long shooting days. She was known to request extra takes for the smallest details, while he was happy to keep things moving. Tension simmered, especially during their most intimate scenes. Pigeon found Garson's approach draining and at times pretentious. Garson, in turn, resented Pigeon's occasional lack of enthusiasm for rehearsals and prep. While they kept things civil, never descending into full-blown feuds, crew members often whispered that, offset, the two barely interacted. They were polite, but distant, each retreating to their own trailer as soon as the cameras stopped rolling. But here's the kicker. All that coolness gave their on-screen marriages a kind of old-world restraint and layered emotion. Their characters' affection always had an undercurrent of unspoken tension. Maybe that's why the drama felt so real. Garson once quipped to a friend, "The only thing we ever fought about was who'd get out of the studio first." Pigeon, ever the diplomat, simply called her remarkable when she lets you breathe. In Hollywood, not every great love story is built on actual love. Sometimes, it's just mutual respect and a dash of impatience that keeps the sparks flying, at least while the cameras are rolling. Who knew so many legendary love stories were fueled by real-life feuds, dirty looks, and the occasional off-screen meltdown? That's Hollywood, where fireworks don't always mean romance. Which of these hostile hookups shocked you most? Or do you think the tension actually made the movies better? Drop your wildest theories or your favorite awkward pairings in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell for more Hollywood drama that's juicier than the movies themselves. After all, the best stories never fade with the credits.